with ED3 Billiards, and Vic is over here off to the side.
Hello.
Today's video stream is going to be about defensive play and the moving game, which is a generic conversation about when you're not really trying to make a ball. So I think one of the skills that you need to do, for learning the moving game, is that ultimately what you're actually doing is learning how to control the speed of the object ball and the speed of the cue ball after contact, which I think that obviously when you're pocketing the ball, when playing position, you're not necessarily playing the position of the object ball if it was to go continue on or not make it. So when you're playing defensive shots where you're not planning to make a ball, you have to understand where is the ball going to end up at the end of the shot. So one of the things that I think that helps people understand a little bit better about how to play a defensive shot or a move when you're playing two balls at once is to understand like the relationship of how much power creates, separation or whatever. So like obviously if you hit it 100% full straight into the one, all the power is going to go into the one ball as far as the velocity of the cue ball, and then none will be left on the cue ball. However, if there's any spin on the cue ball, that spin some of that will still be on the cue ball when it hits the one. So, for instance, if I roll it and hit it full, it'll stop for a brief moment, but then it'll have a little bit of forward spin on it, and I'll make it continue forward. And then the one will just go as far as it goes. So that's part of understanding. Okay, if the velocity will lead the one ball to go to a certain point, but then the residual extra spin that's still on the cue ball will make the cue ball do things too, and that's how you can start to play and add a little bit more power to the cue ball or to the object ball to get it to go where you want, and then more finely tune your position. This is roughly speaking the way I kind of have this set up for me. If you shoot like half ball hit, so meaning just the center of the cue ball, you line that up with half of the object ball that you're hitting, and then you shoot a shot with no English, you'll see that the balls roughly go the same distance. So when you're playing shape to where you're playing safe behind a ball, say the 4 ball here, if I play the cue ball position to right here, then if I hit half ball, hitting the second rail actually should slow this one ball down, so it may end up a little bit maybe like here, but all you have to do is just play your position to the spot, and then you should end up fine. Just by hitting half ball here, just by playing that spot, the ball travels the same distance, roughly speaking. So that's how you can play where you can just play behind the ball, is just understanding that. So like if it's maybe you're like that, and now you have to play a little bit thinner, like going from here to here to make that angle a little thinner than half. So now you know the cue ball is going to travel quite a bit further. So now in a situation where I'm trying to play behind this ball, what I might then do instead of that is play to the rail and back up to here, knowing that this ball has finally had enough time to travel the whole distance. Yeah, I didn't get that ball to go far enough. Like I said, the cue ball went a little bit too far, right? So I hit it too full. Or too thin, excuse me, but more power went onto the cue ball than onto the object ball in that context. So that's one way to understand what you're doing differently than what you want to do. Is you're planning the shot, the angle that you hit it at changes how much energy goes into the object ball. So you have to account for that. And I use basically like, half ball hit, half the energy goes to one ball, half the other, and then thinner than that, more energy goes to the cue ball, and fuller than that, more energy goes to the object ball. So one thing that you can also do is you can apply spin to get more energy. Like on this shot, if I hit it thinly to get the one to go here, and then use a little bit of left English, I can actually get the cue ball to go further than it would if I didn't use any spin. Which in this situation is not really that productive because mostly you just want to be like going to here and here, and that left English is causing it to go way wide. For purposes of this shot, it works out because of force here, but you wouldn't traditionally do that. I was just showing how the extra velocity, like the spin on the cue ball, once it hits this rail, engages and turns into speed, and that's what allows you to get a little bit further with the cue ball and then not have the one ball have nearly as much extra energy on it with the spin that you apply with the stroke. So you use the stroke to put spin on the ball, and then the spin converts to speed once it hits the rail, and you're using that effect to make the cue ball go where you want a little bit more, and then also be able to decide, okay, well, I need a little bit more energy in the cue ball, so I can put a little bit of spin on it and make it go further, or the other way, if you put inside English, I can reverse it, and that will slow it down a little bit, because it's going to kind of like grab and be more friction on the cloth. So that's pretty much all that you need to know about like playing two-way shots, or like both balls, is that, well, you got that's the whole effect. So if you want your cue ball to end up in a spot and you're playing your object ball, then you're going to know how far the object ball goes if you make your cue ball go where you want it to go. So it's not like it's a magical thing. You just have to plan for it and then understand the effects. Like anytime it hits the rail, it's going to slow the ball down. There's energy absorption. So if you're playing like here to here, the second rail is going to take some of the energy off. So don't expect it to go quite as far as you think, because it's going to take energy off when it comes back up this way. So then when you're trying to play safe down underneath and you hit the second rail, that can help slow it. So a lot of times people will play shots to hit the second rail and then come up, just because it just takes a little bit of energy off. So what we'll do is I'm going to rack 10 ball. I'm going to break a couple times, and then I'll show a few different common safety situations. Is anybody on?
This is one watching, but I don't know if that's us.
Yeah, and some of these shots, what will happen is there will be an offensive shot, but the purpose of this is that we're looking for defensive opportunities. So I'm just going to show different situations that come up that you could see a safety being a viable shot, even though there's an offensive shot. If you just think, oh, okay, well, I'm not looking for offensive shots, but I'm looking for common situations where I can get easy safeties out of this. So this rack is pretty wide open. So really, there's not much going on here as far as like common defensive situations that might come up. Now, if you had something like this, now you'd be thinking, okay, well, what's a good way to play safe here? So then, say that we get down to the 6 and the 7, so none of the other balls move, and now what we have is all the balls that are left. And say that you can get wherever you want. This is part of like, if the 5 is here, well, maybe we'll just put the 5 back, because this will help a little bit. So if you have ball in hand here, and you know that you can't necessarily get out, like you could try to break this out, but say it's too risky and you don't have the good angle, maybe you're like, you got here. So now you're like, okay, well, how do I do this? What am I going to do here? So the common ways to play safe on the ball like this is you kind of like try to use the outside ball, which is the high ball, to block this one. So you typically want to be over here so that you can use this ball to protect you from that. And ideally, you could come maybe super thinly around. And see, this situation is because it's really close to the rail. It's probably going to bump it off. And now what I'd really like to do is use these two balls to block it. Now if I had ball in hand, maybe I would try to get over here and play it thin and try to bump the 6 into the rail and then just go that way. Something like, like this, right? So that you're moving the ball, because what you need to do is create offense too. You can't just get safe and then take ball in hand and that wins anything. It doesn't win you, it gets you a better position. If I was to get ball in hand here, see, the 6 doesn't even bear it. Oh, yeah, it does go actually, but you'd be really tight in here. I might not even try to shoot this ball because it almost looks like it doesn't go. You might play another safety, in which case you could shoot the same shot. Like from defensive position here, like if you're kicking at this ball, you got to think, okay, well, what do I want to do here? Like, how am I gonna survive? Now, in the situation where it goes, like say it's like this, and now it clearly goes. Now you really do need to hit it. Now, if it doesn't go because it's like this, you may not have to hit it. You might end up being like, oh, this isn't a good spot for me to try to break it out. If I hit it, it'll break it out for sure. If I don't hit it, it might break it out, and then I'll give him ball in hand. If I give him ball in hand, then he can't win. He has to play another safety. So then maybe I'd rather try that one. So these are kind of thought process things that happen over time. So say it does go like this. We'll just leave it. So if he had ball in hand, he could easily put the ball here and then do the thing. So we'll just take this off the table now. So if I was kicking this ball, you gotta understand that what you're trying to do here is not necessarily make it. Obviously, when it had a clear path here, you'd be calling this corner pocket, try to probably hit either on the way in or rail first by coming down to this way up here, right? What you gotta try to do is understand the speed that you want of the shot. So if you look at all the obstructions of the balls, what's gonna happen here is if you hit it and maybe you hit it a little bit full, then the 6 could go under the 8, and now you're bumping into the 7. So when you talk about your speed, you don't want to hit your speed so hard that if that does happen, then it comes up here or bounces off the ball and comes over here. You'd rather just trickle up to this rail, maybe bump that rail here, and your cue ball potentially could like hit it and then come off and bump the 7 and end up floating like here. The 7 could come up here. You could end up safe. If you hit it too hard, might not happen. So you got to kind of try to predict the speed that you want to hit it at, so that the balls are going where you want them to go, and you're giving yourself an opportunity to do something maybe good to happen. In this situation, you could make the ball, but say you can't make it, and it's like this. Now the same shot is not necessarily going to help you to try to go for it. Now you may end up trying to hit it really thin to keep it on the side rail, because then that, or like keep it, like contain it here, knowing that it doesn't go past the 8. You could shoot the same kind of shot. But now what you might be trying to do instead of that is play your cue ball to float over to this spot here, right? So you'd be hitting it a little bit softer than if the 8 was here, if that makes sense. And it's just a little bit of difference about like, okay, well, what good things can happen, and that's part of the experience of like, okay, well, what things are going to happen most of the time based on the speed of the shot that I'm shooting versus based on the angles that I can hit it at. Because some of the angles kind of hit and make it go the same distance, and because of the way that the energy is, like I said, with the half ball hit, is that if more of the energy goes into the 6, it'll go further, and then the one ball or the cue ball will stay, and then if you hit it really thin, then this ball will stay, and then the cue ball will go. So you're creating the same almost amount of separation with just hitting at the same speed, because you're getting like both balls will go away from each other at the same rate when you hit a half ball hit, or one ball will go away faster than the other ball but it's about the original speed of the cue ball that determines the distance they end up away from each other at the end of the shot. So if you're trying to create this much separation where you get your cue ball to kind of be in this zone and your object ball over here, there's a speed for that, and it doesn't matter so much that they end up exactly like that. What will happen is that one will end up that far away, and then maybe instead of it being like your cue ball here and your object ball here, you might end up where your cue ball will end up here and your object ball will be here, where they're kind of the same distance apart, but in different places. And that's just an experience thing where you start to understand that. So on a shot like this, I would be calling here, obviously, because of that, and I'd be trying to make that shot. But I'd also be trying to play the speed to where if I miss, maybe the cue ball goes into the 9 and stays up on here. So, let's see if I can get it here. You know, and for moving, kicking, and stuff like that, you want to be as accurate as possible. If you use like a 2-rail system like the parallel shift, you don't want to just aim for this ball. You got to aim for the spot you want the cue ball to end up in, which in this case is here. And actually, to be a little bit lower than that, because ideally I think you'd like to go a little bit rail first. Hit it, hit the rail, then hit the ball, and then go this way. That would be like the ideal world. Because if you do make it, and it has a spin, what happens is if you hit it, make it, it's going to have this spin on it, so when it hits the rail, it can potentially come back over to here, and then now you have your shot into the corner. You know, and if you hit into the ball first, it won't happen that way. It might bump the ball, who knows. But I like to you got to play it as detailed as you can. So then instead of it being like hitting the ball head on, which is this line, by aiming to that spot, now instead of that I'm like slightly over, which is just, you know, a quarter of an inch. But, you know, the more accurate you are, with the plan, the more accurate you're going to be with your shot. You know? See, that wasn't even close. I mean, everybody. The ideal shot would be to hit and do that thing. So maybe I'll try it one more time. Something like this. Yeah, so more like this. Yeah, so you hit it full and they didn't get that separation because the cue ball hit that ball and changed it around. But I ended up getting pretty lucky safe here. So instead of going for it here, and a good move would be to try to play your 6 ball down under there and then move your cue ball over to this zone. So what you're going to do is think, okay, well, how hard do I have to hit the 6 ball to make it go to here, right? And what do I have to do? So the angle is roughly, you use your 2-rail system, and you can see it's something like this. So now if I come over here and look at it, I'm like, okay, well, what is that? It's like, it's thinner than half ball hit, so I know that I have to hit, the cue ball is going to go further than the object ball. So now when I play into this rail and back over here, I'm thinking, oh, okay, maybe I'll try to play for this spot because it's further away and I need more travel of the cue ball. So I'll play a little bit of left spin and then try to play down further to hit the point there. But I still got, you can hit it. If I had not hit the point, I think it would hit maybe like this in here. So, you know, this situation, you just end up going for it, right? But maybe you can't make it. So now you have this where you have options here playing safe. You cannot make the ball cutting it. So now your options for playing a safety, you could obviously try to bank this ball and come around and maybe try to get up here for the 7. You know, you can't do much else offensively. But what can you do defensively? And if you look at where all the balls are to hide behind, you can either try to like bank the 6 behind these balls or do a combination of moving the 6, you know, like maybe you bank it straight up and down and then you get your cue ball back over to this side where there's a little bit more of a wall. Or you could play a little bit of, you know, right spin maybe, cut it this way and play your 6 to here and then your cue ball under here. And you got to think, okay, well, if that happens, how easily can I sell out? And this is the reason why I think this kind of shot is not really a great shot all the time, because you're trying to hide behind a ball that you're very close to. And then the way this ball is it's not really safe at any point. If you shoot a shot what I mean by not safe at any point is if you're not hidden behind the 8, it goes pretty much in a hole without much happening. You know, if you can play it to where they have to bank at it, at least if you leave it in this spot, then that's better, you know. So, you know, a shot like where you're playing it across the face of it, like you're playing that, once I get over to here, this area here, these balls are in the way a lot. And then not just that, but the way that the balls are is up here is a little bit harder to pocket, and because of that, it makes it a little bit easier to understand. Okay, what's really safe here? You're creating this distance, and that's part of the shot. Obviously, I banked it right at the hole. If I banked it here, that's what I was trying to do. The cue ball would have went slightly further because it was thinner hit. I hit it a little bit full. But a lot of that stuff is like you gotta kind of decide it when you're playing. Is you gotta pass on the tougher shots and try to find easier, more executable shots that are defensive plays. You know, you don't always have to go for it. You know, or trying to find some sort of a two-way is always a good shot where you have a built-in safety. You know, maybe this is very difficult to cut this 6 in. You know, maybe you're something like there. So now what you do is you play. If I cut it in, I make it, but I play the speed of it. You know, maybe I try to overcut it, or like, and then play the speed to where the 6 will not just lay in the jaws. It'll bump out. You know, again, this shot's not really appropriate. I see something more like this would be good, because now if you hit that, you overcut it. You know, you can leave it tough, and that's just like, well, if I play it such that my 7-ball position is to where I can overcut it and the speed is still there to leave it tough, then I can do that. And then now you're kind of giving yourself a built-in safety, but you are able to now go for it. So you got to understand that's part of the moving game as well. Is that by choosing a shot that has a higher percentage of working out if you don't pocket the ball, which should be your primary value, the result of the shot, if you select it properly, will have a higher percentage of being safe. So those are good shots to look for. You have to kind of spend time looking. Is kind of the problem. Is that a lot of people that they're like, well, how do you get better at safeties? Well, you have to play more safeties. It's the same as everything else. You don't start out knowing what you're doing. You have to jump in there and fail and like leave the ball right in the jaws. You know, hit the speed wrong, all that stuff. Practice all those things. And then you learn your lessons just the way you do when you miss the ball and you leave it in the jaws. It's the same thing. It's just this is an extension of that where you just like have to learn new stuff that it takes time to incorporate into your game. If you don't work towards incorporating into your game, it doesn't just appear out of nowhere. You don't watch someone else do it and then learn how to do it from that. You know, you have to actually kind of like get in there, and it's tough because you don't get the instant gratification of winning like you do when you make the ball, when you play safe and you get maybe a better offensive position. You know, you have to rely on the fact that the game at a higher level comes more down to control than it does about like anything else. The more time you're at the table shooting your shot and not trying to get out of whatever they put you in, the more time you're going to have to be able to manipulate the momentum and hold the other person from being able to be as successful with their strategy through just not being able to have as many opportunities. By limiting your opponent's opportunities, you're going to give yourself, you know, more viable opportunities because you'll have more. And then as you wrest control from the player, you know, they may not play as well because, you know, they may make a couple mistakes based off of tough situations that you get them in that wouldn't exist if you just played offensively, you know, and maybe you don't get there offensively and they have some easier opportunities because of that. Now they have a little bit more momentum, and then it kind of shifts the score. And you got to decide at some point what kind of games you're willing to play and what kind of stories you're willing to tell after the fact. You know, when you play, you know, I don't particularly enjoy playing a lot of defensive moves because it kind of can extend the game if necessary, but a lot of times, you know, you're extending the game unnecessarily by playing kind of what I would call a weak safe, meaning that you're not really moving the game forward by playing a defensive shot. You know, if you're going to, you know, not to say that you shouldn't do that. Sometimes there's just no offense, and really all you can do is just try to hold your opponent from doing something to really make it harder for you, and that's what you have to do. But much of the time, when you play defense, it's almost more like more aggressive shot, in my opinion, in a way than an offensive shot, because you have to be even more trusting of yourself that no matter what they do, or the result of the shot is for my own self, that I'm going to be okay with that fact that there's a learning thing happening, and that's why we're doing it. We're not doing it to be comfortable. We're doing it to learn, and by not shooting our like default shot and shooting a different shot, we're putting ourselves into a uncomfortable position, and then we're also shooting a shot that has no clear, path to victory afterwards necessarily, where you still have to do work after the fact. You don't win instantly when you make the shot. Like if you make the shot offensively, like you do when you get a good defensive plays, you get ball in hand, but that doesn't win you anything. You still have to get out. But that's, as you get better, you have to trust that you put yourself in that situation, and now you're able to control the rack and complete, versus maybe your percentages are not as high if you had to try to get out from there and then maybe you missed it, versus playing the safe and then accepting whatever shot they shoot. After that even happens, that your overall percentages are higher based off of that, allowing your opponent back at the table with whatever position your safety allowed, versus letting your opponent back to the table with whatever the result of the offensive shot that you missed. So the level of execution of your defensive play has to be high enough to thwart your offense of your opponent, at least on that shot. And that's kind of the percentage that you have to try to increase, is your ability to under more circumstances that after your opponent has shot the shot, or after their opponent's inning, that you've had better opportunities. Some of the time you can create difficulties for your opponent when you have no other option. Some of the time maybe you just have no hit. Maybe you're in a situation like, randomly like this, where you can't hit the 6, like there's nothing you can do, but the 9 and the 10 are here, and you're just like, oh, well, I can just, move the 9 under the 10 a little bit, something like that. And now, even though this is separated not enough to be safe, now it actually is something to think about, where you actually do have to get on this ball and then get back to the 10. Ideally, maybe you're more like this, where it doesn't go and you have to maybe bank it to try to get out, and you might not even want to do that. And that makes them think about it, even though you're getting ball in hand. But the original situation was not even something that was even that good. So you're better off here than going for it, to try to hit it sometimes. And that is the same thing as going for it when it's a hard shot, and then knowing that there's maybe an easy move that you can do, or the safety itself is too hard, and all you have to do is like, well, if I can make it tougher or just make it hard for them, where maybe I can't stop them from making the ball. Maybe it's, maybe the cue ball or the other ball is here, and they can make it no matter what, So then what you do is you're like, well, you just make the other ball tougher, or you can even make that ball tougher some of the time, like by hitting the ball into it, like if it's safe. I don't know. You got to be very creative when you're trying to stay alive. That's how it works. It's like when your offense isn't there and you have nothing to do offensively, now you're thinking, well, what mechanisms can I use to try to survive? And that becomes like, okay, well, what do I know is going to be harder for me to necessarily get out? That's why I say something like this, like, well, I would rather, it was like this, you know what I mean? And even more like something like this, where it's like really where everything goes, you don't have to do too much, stay out in the middle of the table a little bit, you're good. So then by like changing it to something like that, you're like, dang, now I have to deal with that. So then by thinking about that as now what you're doing is like, okay, where do I not want to be? And then try to create those situations for your opponent that you yourself do not want to get into, and that causes you to have to kind of reflect on what your own capabilities are, and then you start realizing that your opponent actually has limited capabilities as well. Once you start playing this style of play, you see that people get out way less than you're afraid of. It's just one of those things where, a lot of the reason why our opponent does really well and gets a lot of momentum on us is because we're actually making it easier for them. And that's one of the things we have to learn how to move past, and defensive play is one of the things that can help you with that. And I would say that it's difficult to learn defensive play because the skill that you're trying to learn is learn how to move both balls. So I would say that you should spend energy playing either games that you have to move both of the balls, like one pocket, for instance, and control both balls at the same time, like one pocket, which is also a kind of a defensive game as well. Or you have to do drills that teach you how to do that yourself, or just practice playing intentionally more defensive some of the time when you're competing, even though you don't have to, because that's how you have to do it in order to get better. You have to kind of like change your value system and add more defensive and moving play in order to make that more effective. Got anything? So I don't have much else to talk about. I like to try to tell people that, in my own game, I want to play a certain style. I don't want to sell out as when I can play a smart shot instead. So I look for smart shots to play. I don't necessarily like go all out to try to play defense when it's not warranted. With that being said, that I think it's foolish to shoot shots that have very little upside, and you have to identify what kinds of shots you're going to start playing more safeties on, so that you can work towards that. Some of the times you might only play, easy type safeties where, you might be faced with a shot where you're like this, where maybe it's a tough cut, right? Or you don't know if you can make it. You're like something like this and thinking about like, okay, well, it might be hard to make this ball, or maybe I can't get shape. The 7, maybe it's down here, and I got no chance for shape. I have to just do everything I can just to make it. Then you think, oh, okay, well, if you think about what kinds of things you can do to help yourself keep control, you'd be like, well, I can use the 10 as a blocker if I just play a stop shot here, and then make sure that the angle actually is to hit this rail and back up so that it comes back over here. So as long as I'm, like this goes to the pocket, so, this goes to the pocket. So as long as my angle is the same or steeper than this one, it should hit this rail. So that's where I'm like, okay, well, yeah, I should hit it here on the rail with just a stop shot. So now I just play a stop shot, or like maybe just draw it a hair into the 10. See, I ended up twisting it, so that's the thing, is you gotta be careful about how you're making sure to play it. Because if that doesn't hit there and it comes around, you're good. So it's like the stop shot is easy to play here, and now you just have to control that ball, which is what I failed on that shot. But that's part of like the thing you gotta do to learn, is to understand when you're playing both balls, it gets very tricky. Just by me applying draw here, I feel like it made me hit it harder, and then now the angle didn't open up as much, for that shot, and that's why I ended up hooking myself, but it's like you got to try and actually execute those types of shots in order to see how to do them. Another shot that I think is good to learn is when people play safe on you and they leave the ball like close to the rail. You don't necessarily have to bank this ball or try to cut it. Another option is to try to kick it in the side and then play the speed such that, and probably for this shot, it's not as good to have the 9 ball here, but because you could hit it and slow it down. What you're really trying to do is like kick underneath with spin under the 7, right, and then have it kick it in the side, and if it doesn't, it might hit like in this region here, and then your speed sends it down over to this zone, and your cue ball is going to stay, roughly speaking, in here if you played your cue ball properly. And you can make it. And in this situation, if you were to kick it in the side and make it, you're on the 8, and that's kind of where you want it to be anyways. And this kind of thing, you got to practice these shots, like spin it off the rail. See, I hit underneath it. It's not always easy. This is the thing about you got to like practice all these things. None of it just comes automatically. You're going to fail at everything that you do when you start, and the sooner you start doing it, the sooner you'll get done failing, ultimately, and start being successful. So I'd recommend that if any of you are planning on engaging in any safety play, think about how you can add it to your game and make it smart and not just, necessarily boring. Like, see, I overspun it, but I created distance and separation, and I kept my cue ball down there, and now my opponent is in a tough spot, and that, and you gotta weigh your ability to execute that shot against your ability to make the ball and can maintain control of the table. You might make the ball and have no control, and now you're in a tougher spot than you were before you shot, because there's less balls on the table. The less balls are on the table, the higher likelihood your opponent will run out from any particular place, statistically speaking, So, the earlier you are in the rack, the better off you're going to be. If you're making mistakes, your opponent's going to get out less often. So, by shooting shots in, you're also helping your opponent. As long as you don't step on your toes, and fall, and you keep going, you're good. But as soon as you miss, your opponent's going to have an easier time. So you have to consider, that's just the way it works. So, learning how to get yourself out of like little jams and make it tougher for your opponent is really worth a lot of, it helps me be a little bit more mentally tough knowing that I have like options and I kind of have a good feel for what I'm going to do in a lot of situations. Like if I'm going to kick at this 7 ball, what shot do you shoot? Like in a key situation, be like, well, what are my goals here? Like, well, ordinarily what I'd like to do is just keep separation of the 7 and the 8 as much as I can. So I'd probably be kicking down that way, rather than kicking up and kicking back down. If I kick this way, maybe I can kick it in the corner, and make it. That's totally a shot. But the problem is that the cue ball will probably stay up here and not have a shot on the 8, and if I miss it and I get close anywhere, then it'll be hung up and ready to go for my opponent. I don't necessarily want to do that. So then instead of that, I might take a little bit of a maybe more difficult shot on paper and try to kick it in the corner over here, hoping that we end up with a situation where maybe I kick it full and then the 7 comes up here, like hits the rail and comes up this way, and then the cue ball floats down over here and leaves a weird bank where he has no real opportunity to run out, even if I was to leave that shot open. So I would shoot a shot like, I'd call that corner, and then I would just shoot to try to play my speed to get a good separation, Jeez. I really gotta work on my kicking. Let's try to do this again. So, so much of this is really good practice, but if you don't do this, something like that even, see, like, look at this. This is like, yeah, you can pocket the ball here, but it's like not necessarily they're going to get out, and that's the thing that a lot of times when you go for it and you don't get there, it's way worse than if you played like a ho-hum average safety or just like made an educated shot like that where I kicked it away from the ball that's next. And that's all really the intelligence that you need for that shot. And then if you hit it, a lot of the time you're going to get a little bit safe. If this ball ends up on the rail at all, so many of these shots are hard to get up there. And that, I'm here, so yeah, you can kind of, but in this situation, we're going away from the ball, away from that ball. So with this type of elevation, you got to really put a nice stroke on it to get around, and if I had just went all out to just make that shot, and shot it this way, yeah, maybe I can, you feel like you can make it, right? But the thing is, the closer you get to making it, yeah, this might work out. See, but maybe not, right? Yeah, see, this didn't work out really. I could jump it, but I also feel like, you can kick this in, and now it's over. See, and that wasn't like it did. Even though I had to like kick at the ball, it still wasn't as good, So that's just like thinking about like how your opponent's likely to run out if you leave in random spots. That's another thing you got to really think about too. Really, I got not much else in this. Is there anybody?
There's 2.
No comments? Alright, well I think I'm going to call it a day then. We've had a long day. If you guys had any interest in what I was talking about, any more things you'd like me to talk about, we have the school group. We're trying to build the following through, hopefully talking about what people want to learn about. I know that there's a lot of things out there, a lot of information out there, and we're obviously adding to that. I think that what I try to help people with is understanding their own selves, and like helping them try to figure out where they're going next, and helping people kind of like get their foot in the door with making that little bit of change to like really open their game up and add a level that they didn't previously have that maybe they're not sure about how to incorporate. So, these things like learn how to play safeties and learning about the moving game is like, well, you don't have to necessarily like play defensively to learn about how to move both balls at the same time. You can pretend, you can play like more slower pocket speed shots where you're just rolling the ball, barely going, and then now you're understanding where the cue ball is going to go and the object ball is going to go by playing both the speed of both shots. And that's the habit you need to get into, is playing as much of the shot as you can, understanding that as all the things that move, all that energy that's there, that's being expressed on the table, came from you generating it and applying it in a particular way. So the more you can understand about what is happening when you do a certain thing will allow you to progress more quickly. And by like looking at how quickly this ball is rolling after you hit it and how much of the energy transfer goes to each ball and how they interact on the rails, will then give you more confidence to try to play safeties when it's time, because you'll be more confident the balls are going to go and land where you expect, because you've been setting yourself up to learn about that by paying more attention to it. Because I think it gets to be where people think, oh, well, I need to get to where they have nothing. And yeah, that's the goal, but you got to start with, well, I'm going to make it tough for them, just like it's tough for me when I'm on the rail or I'm tied up a little bit behind the ball or have to kick at it, and then, or if I have to try to put like a monster stroke on it to get it back to the other ball. Any of these situations that you're leaving your opponent in where they have that narrative are more difficult than, well, we missed and, I ended up having like a kind of a tough shot, but all I had to do is make it, and then my next ball, was there, so it wasn't a big deal. All I had to do was pocket the ball, so you can kind of control the way that you win and lose by shooting shots differently. So if you're like not satisfied with the way that you're winning and losing, changing the way that the kinds of shots you shoot will help you have different stories at least to talk about. If you decide, well, I'm going to go down shooting and I'm going to start banking balls in and all that, that at the beginning it's probably likely that you're going to be like, oh, I missed a lot of banks and I lost a lot of games. But then if you stick with that strategy, you're going to start making more of those banks and win more of those games because you went for it and you learn how to like do that thing. And the same thing applies to playing safeties. You're gonna make a lot of safeties that don't do you very much good, and then you're also gonna have a lot that do you some good, and you don't help yourself out by getting out. So that's why you don't have to spend so much time like working on your safety game, because you still have to build your offense. It's just that once your offense is built up, now if you build your safety game up, you can set your offense up for easier opportunities, and that's the purpose of it. It's not to like make your defensive game the end all be all. It's to allow yourself more opportunities to have easier runouts in the end, make it harder for your opponent to win. That means that you're actually increasing your own percentages. If it's harder for them to win, that's less wins that they have. Who's winning then? You're winning. So that's what you're doing. By reducing their percentages, you're increasing your percentages. You have to believe that. So it's worth it to play safe. It's worth it to learn how to play safe. You don't have to do it all the time, and it's not convenient to do it all the time, and it's not necessary or productive. And that's part of the understanding of learning by trying different things. Like, oh, well, that didn't even help anyways, or that was actually really good. It was easy, and those types of things.
Oh, sorry. Andrew says, really appreciate you putting this out there. Great advice.
You're welcome, Andrew. Happy to help. Anytime you want me to talk about something, feel free to make a comment about it. That's what we're doing. I want to talk about everything that anybody else wants to talk about or wants to hear about, really. Obviously, it's a one-way channel, so it is what it is. But I appreciate all that, and like I said, it's kind of like community-driven. A once we have the pool hall going, we're going to have all this content that we're going to be building to do the pool school and all that stuff. And anyone that wants to, assist in that can aid by like coming up with material to talk about, by asking questions now, because it all will eventually be on there. And the sooner that you ask questions about anything that you're curious about, the sooner they'll be answered. Because your own search for answers requires you to ask specific questions. You can't be like, well, I want to get better, and then get better by just doing whatever. You have to, if you say, well, I'm going to specifically get better at understanding one aspect of the game, that's how you improve. Just like I said, the first thing you do is you realize that every shot you can start spending a little bit more energy seeing how hard the object ball is moving, how fast it's moving when you hit it, which you may not have been paying as much attention to prior because you're just trying to make it go in the hole, not concerned so much with where it would end up when we don't make it go in the hole, which is the primary concern when you're playing a move. And in this game, it's like, well, if you're good enough to see that it's happening, you won't really think about it in terms of like making the ball. You just be like, the ball is going that direction and the hole is there, so that's what we want to do. And if the safety is in that direction, we want it to go in that direction. So it's still about object ball control. It's still about cue ball control. It's still about speed control. That's not different. It's just the reason why you're doing it, and the way that you're looking at it, your perspective has to shift. You have to kind of like realize that you have to be open to things that you haven't been open to before, and explore things that you're not comfortable with. And I think the defensive play is high on the list of things that people are like, well, they don't really like playing defense because a lot of times it doesn't look like it's not flashy, first of all, which is what it is. It's not flashy, and not every safety works out. Sometimes they get out of it, but it's the same thing with anything else. Sometimes you make the best shot you've ever shot, and then the cue ball freezes to the back of the ball, and you have nothing. That happens. It's the same with safety. You hit a really good ball, you almost get perfect, but then the cue ball rolls off like a quarter of an inch, and now they're like dead out. And then they win easy. And that happens. But you have to put yourself in that situation in order to learn how to hit that ball to where it does freeze on the ball, and then they do have a really tough shot. And that's just a practice thing. You have to put yourself out there and understand. Okay, mentally going into it, it's like, I don't care what happens. I'm going to be okay with the results of my shot and the result of whatever shot they shoot. And none of that's going to bother me because the quest is to learn and improve my ability to control the balls on the table. That's what's going to make me a better player. And by shooting different shots that I don't shoot all the time, I'm going to get better. And then when those kinds of shots come up in games, then I can use those shots because I know them. And if I don't learn them, then I won't know them and I won't even see that they're there. And then, your game is going to be more limited, So I hope that everyone kind of like understands that, by just repeatedly doing the same things, you're going to get the same results. And if you're improving, you're likely to continue to improve. So you shouldn't even really think about like what you're going to change. The problem comes when you start to stagnate, and then now you got to look for things to change. And most of the time, people spend a lot of time working on their offense, which can develop. But by having a little bit more of a balanced game, you can actually develop kind of like your mental game too, because now you're not afraid as much because you have a little bit more nuanced game than you would if you're just like offensively minded, and it's not that you use your defensive all the time, but it's there if you need to. So I hope that everybody kind of like uses that as a stimulus to like, at least think about playing a little bit more safeties. You don't have to like decide, okay, I'm going to play 3 safeties a game, for the next month, and then that's going to teach me it. I bet you that would work actually, and you would probably win a significant amount of games, from playing safeties, more safeties, and it could be fun. It also could be really boring. So maybe mix it in a little bit here and there, and look for the easy safeties, the ones that you're not seeing that are really can break the game open. Those are the ones that I like to, are the ones that like they're not that hard to do physically wise, and then they maximize your easier opportunities. So just looking for all that stuff. It becomes like kind of a quest if you're a little bit defensive minded. I look offense first mostly because you want to win without your opponent shooting. Some of the time you can't see the way necessarily, so you got to leave yourself open, ideally, to be able to play safety that can help you move yourself forward without taking on so many risks. And That's a style. You know, you have to choose your style. So hope y'all got some benefit out of that, and have a good night. We'll see you later.